Hello and welcome back to the Joe and Toby Talk podcast. It's been quite a while since we've sat down and done one of these, and we've had a little think about it and how we want to make this a thing going forward. And let's just go into it with the title, Joe and Toby Talk. That's what we're going to do in this podcast. Talk about our interests, of which we have a lot, from sport, film, TV, music, and quite a niche area of expertise, I would say. So, sit down for an hour. We'll have a chat. Hopefully you'll join in. Maybe in the future we'll get guests on and things like that as well. But we're just going to switch the microphones on for an hour and have a natter, because that's what we do, and we thought, why not turn it into a podcast? So I'm Joe, or Captain Goodspeed, if you are somehow new around here and you are watching or listening on Spotify. And I am delighted to be joined by my wonderful co-host, the wonderful former YouTuber, Mr. Toby Jones. How are you doing?
You said Toby Jones and that's it, and then there's you, Joe Hannard, Captain Goodspeed Bond, Captain Goodspeed Retro, or how many other aliases you have. I'm just Toby Jones. And
Toby
even
Jones.
The channel that might be coming back, might not be coming back, is called Toby Jones. So very simple that it's me. I have to say, when you introduced us then and said that this will be about all of our interests, I have to say that if we do span those interests, people will fall asleep very quickly. But if they're mad enough to join us, then great stuff. We have got a span of interests. Funnily enough, most of them quite common and quite joint, I would guess. And I have to say, in all fairness to yourself, a lot of those that I have are probably inherited from you. I think snooker, Bond, Roger Whittaker. Should we go any further, or just stay with those three?
Well, that's probably about right, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite funny.
I even got you back into doing YouTube, football management YouTube. So some of the interests that I've given you, you're not so appreciative of, I think. But collecting, that was another one, wasn't it? PS2 games.
Yes,
jigsaws.
I wasn't so appreciative of the PS2. Well, I was at one time, until I realised my wardrobe's now full of PS2 games that I don't play. But in fairness, I did start and finish a James Bond game last week on the PS2, so I was happy with that, and that's something I want to do a bit more going forward. I don't want those games to just collect dust. I want to get back into that a bit more. You can see the glamorous hobby of jigsawing behind me. You can see I always hate being on webcam. If you're listening, you won't have an idea what's going on. But I always hate being on webcam because either which way seems wrong when you're looking directly at the webcam. But you can see back there, we have my... There we go, that's better. My CD collection.
I might have cropped that out, Toby, to be honest. They might not be able to see it, but I will.
In the direction my hand is in, if you follow the direction, my CD collection is back there, which you've probably cropped out, but at least you can see the jigsaw, so that's all right.
Yeah.
But today we're going to be talking about three of our main shared subjects, I would say, that will probably form most of these episodes, which are football, snooker, and Formula One. Now, football, the Premier League that is really entering its exciting time now. The last 6 or 7 games now, where 3 are going to go down, somebody's going to win the league, teams are going to get into the top 4. Unfortunately, Liverpool aren't going to get that much. But hey-ho. And then we have the World Snooker Championship that's going on as well, that started yesterday as we record this, and we'll see how long it takes Joe to get this uploaded to see how relevant this data is going to be. No pressure. And then we have the F1 season, which started a couple of weeks ago, and we'll touch on that. But the topics are going to go from football, then the snooker, and then we'll finish off with the F1. At least I think that's what we agreed beforehand.
Yeah, but, as always, we'll probably go on some sort of tangent. So any other topics, you'll probably see by the title of this podcast what we're actually talking about. But that is the plan, anyway, for the next hour or so. Obviously wonderful to have you, Toby, and great to be doing this again, because actually where this all spawned from was me having a little bit of a trip down nostalgia lane and looking back at some of my old series, and we actually did a live podcast called Tuesday Night Live, and that went on for quite a while. I think we did it for 17 or 18 consecutive weeks. I mean, it's probably the most committed thing you've ever done, to be fair. But
but very true. Very true.
But
I think we did that first series of about, as you say, 17, 18 episodes. And if I remember right, we both went to America separately.
Yep.
Went to Florida, did a summer message. We'll be back in the autumn. Didn't happen.
Well, it did actually, because I couldn't find any evidence of it until I had a little look on YouTube, and I think it's now detected it as a podcast. So I think it's in a different section of the channel somewhere. I think that's why I couldn't find it. But we did keep that up. You know, a live podcast. I don't think anything had really been done like that at the time. It was a very good concept, and you know, I think both of us have very work heavy lives now. You know, back then, well, Toby, you were still at school and I was just starting university, so you know, a long time has passed. We've got other commitments now, so a live podcast doesn't really work for either of us, I don't think, in terms of having it every single week at the same time. And you know, so we thought we'd do something where we record it. Obviously, we have had this channel for a few years, and we've had some ridiculous numbers of views on it, haven't we? I think there's 17,000 views on our World Championship 2021 preview video. So that's pretty insane, isn't it? But we'll see how it goes. But yeah, as you talked about, football, obviously I've got massively back into football the last couple of years. I think having Sky Sports back as a subscription has really helped with that, and I think you're kind of going the other way with it. As I'm getting well back into football, you're getting a little bit disillusioned with it, maybe because Liverpool aren't having the best of seasons. Just a bit of context for you, Toby supports Liverpool, even though he's from, you know, Birmingham, Stoke, Wolverhampton.
No, come on.
Panic.
So, no, where are you from, and who did you support?
So,
I think the distance is a lot longer.
It probably is, actually, although I think the length of drive would be fairly similar for both, but maybe not, actually. Maybe not. But
no,
yeah,
not at all.
No, not driving. I was thinking of trains, that sort of thing. Trains from Central Station. I think you could get into London fairly quickly. But anyway, when I was a mere young boy, my first experience of football was actually watching Newcastle versus Arsenal. And all my family were Newcastle supporters, but Arsenal were pretty good back then. Might well have even been the invincible season. I can't quite pinpoint it. And quite a few people at school actually supported Arsenal. You don't really get that too much now, funnily enough. But yeah, I used to support Arsenal. Supported Arsenal pretty passionately for a good while, until, you know, sort of 2014, 2015, I would say. And then that's when I started losing interest in football, and then we had the whole Wenger out scenario, which actually we talked about in our old podcast. That was our very first podcast. We talked about Wenger in or Wenger out, and we were both very much of the opinion Wenger in, and I think we were proven right, actually. When Wenger did eventually leave his role in 2018, Arsenal had a bit of a lull after that, didn't they? And you know, obviously only getting back to those sort of levels now where they can challenge for titles again. But yeah, I supported Arsenal. Sort of went off football altogether, and then, you know, a couple of years ago started paying more attention to the Newcastle results, and you know, particularly around the sort of Rafa Benitez and Steve Bruce reigns of Newcastle. I enjoyed watching them, and actually felt worried about their results, which I hadn't felt for a long time. And, you know, and that's just sort of coincided with getting back into football. And all of a sudden Newcastle have started doing well, so it's worked out all right for me, but it could have been very different had they went down last season, which they could have easily have done had they not had their takeover. So, yeah, that's a long way around of saying I'm now a Newcastle supporter. I used to be an Arsenal supporter though. But Toby is the most fickle person you'll meet on the internet. This season alone, I think he's supported Liverpool, Notts Forest, Man United, Aston Villa now. Yeah.
I'm not even going to comment with that. The Villa thing was only to get to you yesterday. I have to say, I can't believe how well Villa have done, though. And it pains me to say, because as a child, Steven Gerrard, the top idol of mine, didn't exactly do all that well there. But it just shows in the Premier how, if you can start winning games consistently, how easily you can rise up the league. It's a real funny one. I think that the league is so good. There's some real quality everywhere, maybe apart from Southampton, if we're being completely realistic. And I think there's some real quality everywhere. And I think that if you've just got that small difference, you can start to win games. And I think that's where even Liverpool have struggled, having an ageing side and haven't got that little bit of quality difference anymore, which pushes them up the league. And if it's a case of everybody beats everybody, you end up with a championship scenario where it's so close. And that's why you've ended up with 7 or 8 teams fighting down the bottom. And ultimately being very close for the top 4 as well, between a couple of sides. And then the 2 teams that have played the best are streets ahead of everybody else. And that 2-team scenario has been like that for the last 4 or 5 years. Unfortunately, one red team has fell out of favour for another red team. But as much as I'm not an Arsenal fan, it is nice to see another team up there. It's just like any sport. It's nice to see a bit of variety.
Absolutely. But, I think it's been good to see some different teams up there. Man United seem to be somewhere near back to their best this season. Obviously won a trophy. They've still got those problems where they will lose games that they shouldn't, and I don't think they ever did that in the past. And obviously they've come back. Newcastle have been right at the top of the league. Arsenal back in it, and I actually it's been a very good Premier League season. But imagine how much better it would be if Chelsea, Arsenal, Spurs were also firing on all cylinders and were right up there fighting. It could have been an all-time classic season.
I don't think that's ever going to happen, because what happens, especially with Chelsea, especially in the past, if it's very much win the league or get fired situation at Chelsea, and you're never going to get 4, 5, 6 teams firing on all cylinders, because the teams that are in 5th and 6th are always going to have pressure on the manager. Even now, if that's Tottenham, probably Tottenham, because Tottenham's the best example of being the team who, out of the traditional top 5 or 6, probably the least favoured to get there. And that's the odd thing with Tottenham. I don't know whether Tottenham can go on and do any more, ultimately. I guess that you can be quite encouraged by what Arsenal have done this year. And I think Arsenal have got about it in the right way, like Liverpool, really, of building a team of players that haven't cost the earth. I think that's what annoys some people about the route that Chelsea have gone down, that they've spent loads of money in a short space of time, and it's just not sustainable. And it's completely backfired for Chelsea at the moment. And I think that the first rot in that was sacking Tuchel. I just didn't understand that decision. Yeah, they weren't doing great, but if they had a European great in mind to replace Tuchel, I would understand. But to bring Graham Potter in, who'd got no experience of that sort of football, had done very well at Brighton, but managing Brighton, no disrespect to Brighton, but managing Brighton and managing Chelsea are 2 completely different prospects, purely because of the stature of both clubs. Chelsea are in Europe. There's a much bigger expectation to go and win games every week. I think with Brighton, as we saw last season, I think they went on a good run, if I remember right, at the start of the season, then faded off towards the end. There's nowhere near as much exposure to that and pressure that comes with that, because Brighton fans would probably accept a top 10 finish. Chelsea fans, of course, won't accept that. So if you start losing a couple of games, there's some real pressure that starts to come. And I think that the players didn't really respect Potter's pedigree. There's been ranging reports, and I think the size of the squad was awful as well. I heard reports that you would have 11-a-side match in training, another 9-a-side match because of the sheer volume of players. So Graham Potter wasn't able to look at everybody. And then they go and spend all that money, and I don't think Graham Potter had a lot to do with it. I think there was a lot of director of football stuff behind the scenes, from what I can gather. And to go and spend all that money and still not have a prolific striker just baffles me, because ultimately, if you're not going to score goals, you're not going to get very far. You can have the best defenders and midfielders in the world, but if you haven't got a proven goal scorer, you're not going to get very far. And you might say, well, they've got that in Aubameyang. Well, they definitely haven't, because Aubameyang fell out of favour at Arsenal. I think that's something that Arteta did well, to get rid of those older, more disruptive players. And that's definitely worked. But Chelsea just look like a club with no identity and no idea at the moment. And I think that's culminated in bringing Lampard back. I just don't understand that. They sacked him. He went to Everton, did a less than impressive job there. Mediocre, I would say. Just about kept them up last season. But I think that there was a bit of fortune in that the clubs below them struggled and they just about stayed up, and then really flattered to deceive at the start of the season.
Yeah.
And got sacked from there. And they go and bring him back. And it all stems back to this thing of, why did they sack Tuchel? They might as well have kept him for the whole season and then had a different view on at the end of the season. But these clubs, they're all too quick to act, I think, on the manager these days. And Leicester being another one, sacking Rodgers. And I think now they've sacked Rodgers, they've brought Dean Smith in. Again, a decent manager, but why would you... I don't understand why you'd sack somebody and bring somebody in who's not an upgrade on that. It just doesn't make sense. Palace, the perfect example of doing it the right way. Sacking Vieira and bringing somebody in who's got a proven track record of keeping teams up in the Premier League. And you look what's happened the last couple of weeks, and that's gone exactly right for Crystal Palace. Probably the only club who haven't done that now is Forest, isn't it? Haven't sacked
and West Ham.
Yeah, West Ham as well, yeah. I think that both of those clubs have got it right, though, because even if they do go down, I think if they got rid of the manager there, who would come in and do a better job? We always see the farcical list of names when a manager gets sacked. Jesse Marsh went to Leeds and nearly got them relegated. Steven Gerrard went to Villa and didn't do anything there. Rafa Benitez, can't really say the same about him, but hasn't had the pedigree and hasn't had the last couple of years. Ralph Hasenhüttl, I think he would have actually been better off down at Southampton. I think, again, them sacking him was a stupid thing.
Agreed.
But is he going to go somewhere else and do anything? Then they chuck Vieira into the pot, who's just been sacked for potentially relegating another team. It's just bonkers. And then the new name, of course, is Vincent Kompany, who's done a great job with Burnley in the Championship. There's no doubt about that. But he'd be stupid to move on from there. He can only lose. There's been talk of going to Tottenham, and I can't see that one working out at all. I just don't understand it.
Well,
really.
For me, the Vincent Kompany one screams Lampard to Chelsea the first time. Obviously Lampard had done an all right job at Derby. I mean, if you look at what Derby have done since Lampard, I think credit has to be given to him for getting them all the way to a playoff final, but then chucked straight into a top Premier League job. And I think Kompany really needs maybe a season in the Premier League with Burnley, see if he can keep them in the league, and then maybe move on to an upper mid-table Premier League side. But I'm sure we can talk about that until the cows come home. But I mean, the Chelsea situation, just to come back to that, and I think you hit the nail on the head, actually, of they've spent all of that money, and I don't think people would necessarily have the problem with that had they went and spent 200 million on Haaland or somebody, a real star player to come in, and Benzema, somebody like that comes in and scores goals instantly. They've
got one, but he's out on loan.
Well, Lukaku, yeah. I mean, I really rate Lukaku. Actually, I think he's been very hard done by in terms of its spells at Chelsea. I think he did a sensational job at Everton. He played well at West Brom. He did a good job at Man United, really. Obviously just didn't fit with what Mourinho wanted from his squad, and that's fine. Obviously, Mourinho had his own players, and then it just never seems to work out at Chelsea. I'm not really sure why he went back there in the first place, but that's the thing with Chelsea. They're very much let's go back to this player, let's go back to this manager. Chelsea have had a lot of managers over the years that have already managed Chelsea in the past. Obviously, one of the big favourites for getting the job in the summer is Jose, which that would be his fourth. It would be his third spell at Chelsea, wouldn't it? Not his fourth spell, but obviously. It would be a massive risk for Jose to go back in there as well, I think, and I think that if he was to fail at Chelsea again, then that would be a real stain on his legacy. But they're just a complete mess at the moment, and it is just absolute panic. Lots of their signings are just real poor judgments of business. It's like when you're in Football Manager and you've got 300 million to spend and you lose the first couple of games of a season and you go, right, I need to buy 6 players, and you just waste that money, and they're never very good because you can't get anybody at that stage of the summer that you're expecting to make a big impact on the team. And I think that's where we're at with Chelsea. I mean, they're 11th in the Premier League at the minute, Toby. They've scored 30 goals, which I think it's the 5th worst in the division. So that is where their big problem is goals. I think they've got lots of creative players, but there's no good having all of that if you haven't got somebody to stick it into the back of the net. And I think that's where they've made their big mistakes this season. Not necessarily sacking Tuchel, not necessarily appointing Graham Potter. In my opinion, it's that failure in the summer to get somebody. If you're going to send Lukaku out on loan, you bring somebody, and I don't care who he is, but he's somebody that scored 25, 30 goals in the last season. And whether you go and sign Harry Kane or whether you go and sign, I don't know, Callum Wilson, somebody that has literally got Premier League pedigree and can score your goals if you give them the correct service. I mean, they could have had Isak, who has gone in at Newcastle. He was a very highly talked about player before he joined Newcastle in the summer. There's lots of players that have. I mean, Jesus at Arsenal, again, another player that Chelsea could have had, but it's just poor business. And I think the problems with Chelsea are much higher up the chain than the manager and the players, really. The players have been brought in without any real plan. It's they're looking at the coach reports, the scout reports of the star ratings, but they're not actually looking deeper at that and how does this make a team. And yeah, I mean, who would you look at going in the summer that can fix the mess that is Chelsea at the moment?
Well, I think first things first, they've just got to completely write this season off.
Yeah.
And that's why I can kind of understand the appointment of Lampard a little bit more. Not that it'll help him out personally, but at least then somebody can come in with fresh in the summer rather than having the pressure of trying to play these last sort of 7 or 8 games that are completely meaningful, really. Not meaningful, rather, for Chelsea, because they're not going to get anywhere. Of course, there's the Champions League, but that's pretty much done. They lost 2-0 to Real Madrid, and Liverpool know all too well that Real Madrid are not easily beaten, and I don't think Chelsea are going to get 2 goals against anybody, to be quite blunt. So to get 2 without reply, just to force extra time against Real Madrid isn't going to happen. Who's going to go in the summer? I don't know. I really don't know the answers to that, because I think the favourites are Nagelsmann, who's just been sacked by Bayern Munich. Pochettino, would you want to go there? I don't know. It's a good project for him, I think, if he goes there.
I think he would. But before you go on, I think Pochettino is actually in a very interesting part of his career where if he waits too much longer, he's going to have to accept a mid-table Premier League side, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I just don't see how I don't see where he gets into it, because he's not going to get into Arsenal or City or United, because he would have already got into United had he had that chance. So I think it's Spurs, Chelsea, or nobody for Pochettino, in my opinion. But
Well, I've just got the odds up. Another name is Luis Enrique, who I don't know a lot about, but obviously he's been in charge of a lot of big sides as well. Brendan Rodgers in there? No.
it screams
no.
the Potter scenario with Rodgers. I think Rodgers could do a good job, but he's got to have full control over the team that he builds.
And then at 50-1, we have Jesse Marsh. I'll say no more about that one.
But, you know, I mean, Chelsea are certainly not afraid to get in a manager that nobody's heard of. You know, they've done that in the past. I mean, obviously, Mourinho, when he was first appointed, had just won the Champions League with Porto, but he wasn't a household name. You know,
No.
that's something that I think goes in their favour, really, is that they're not afraid to go and get somebody.
Do you think they're at a similar or even worse position than, say, Arsenal and Liverpool were in when Arteta and Klopp took over? Because they were sort of 7th or 8th, weren't they? And they've got up. I don't know if Chelsea's problems are as bad as that, because they have potentially got a team. You could look at that team and say, well, if they bring a good striker in, they'll be all right. I don't know. I really don't know what the answer to that question is myself.
I think Chelsea are in a very similar position to where Liverpool are now, in terms of, I mean, Chelsea, for years and years and years, they've had a bloated squad. You know, I think they've had more players out on loan than they have at the club. And that's been a thing for years, and was one of the reasons why the registration rules were brought in, that you could only have squads of 25, because teams like Man City and Chelsea were bloating their squads, essentially. So I think they need to trim the fat from that squad. I think Liverpool are very similar. Obviously, with Liverpool, it's in the case that a lot of their players are old now, and it's about moving those players on and breeding in new blood. So I think that's going to be the manager's number one job in the summer, is maybe not to sign anybody other than maybe a striker, and try and get rid of so many of these players that just aren't. I mean, money's clearly not an issue to them, so just get rid of them. You know, it doesn't really matter about getting their money back, because they're not going to get their money back. They're not going to get 100 million back for Raheem Sterling or something. And perhaps he's a player that the new manager will want, but that's got to be their number one job for me. And I think it will be 3 or 4 years until you've got a settled enough squad to get back to competing for, you know, honours again. I think the Manchester United situation is possibly the best comparison, where maybe when Van Gaal was in there at the start, they signed a load of players for a lot of money and were still miles off. And I think that's probably the best comparison. And it's took Man United a long time to just go, right, we're not going to sign ridiculous numbers of players. We're going to work with what we've got and build on that, which is why they've still got the likes of Scott McTominay in the middle of the park. You know, he's not really a traditional Manchester United central midfielder, but is in there because he's been there a long time. And I think that's what they're going to have to do with Chelsea, really.
True. I think Chelsea have always been a yo-yo club, though. They've never had sustained periods of success.
Since Mourinho left.
It was the free. Well, even when Mourinho was there, they always used to call it, and it's always been the same with Jose, is the 3-year syndrome. You'd win the league and then sack the manager, and we have this constant up and down with Chelsea, and we've had that for a long time, I think. I think if you look at the Premier League, obviously, they won it under Conte, they've won it under Mourinho.
Ancelotti.
Ancelotti as well, and they've just always had this up and down cycle. So I think I genuinely wouldn't just be surprised if Chelsea are a fourth again next year. I think that a lack of European football will help them out in that way. I think it won't help them out with signing players, but it will help them to get back on a more even keel in the Premiership. But I think top 4 is really their their limit next season. I don't think they'll go much further than that. But for now, it's going to be a bottom half finish, I think, for Chelsea. I can't see how they're going to improve. I can't see how they're going to win games. They just don't look inspiring to me at all at the moment. And it'll be a bottom half finish for Chelsea. They're not going to go down, of course, but yeah, they're not looking good. I think to move this on, though, if we look at the bottom, as you've alluded to, my second club is Forest, purely because my old man's a Forest fan, and them being back in the big time this year has been great for me. Is just to get the experience back with my dad, really, of football, rather than just following Liverpool. And with Liverpool's woes, it's been quite pleasant to follow Forest. Of course, Forest haven't had the best season either, so not been great there. But looking at the three that are down there at the moment, which as it stands at the moment are Southampton, Leicester and Forest, I think those are the three that will go. I think that I think Bournemouth have done an unbelievable job of getting themselves out of it, because I think that they were one club. I think at one point, probably a couple of months ago, it was always Southampton, Bournemouth, and somebody else. But Bournemouth have done a great job. It just shows if you can win a couple of matches, you can get out of it. Southampton, I think they had a good couple of opportunities in the matches they had. They've played Crystal Palace, they've played West Ham recently, and lost both of those. And I watched the West Ham game, and they didn't look inspiring at all. One big game that I guess they've got is against Bournemouth at home in a couple of weeks' time. If they can win that one, then possibly. But they've also got to play Arsenal, Newcastle, and Brighton all away from home. They're not going to get anything out of those. They've got to play Nottingham Forest again away from home. I wouldn't fancy them in that one. I'd fancy Forest at home because they've got a good home record. So I can't see them getting enough points to get out of it. Leicester, again, I think they might pay for sacking the manager. I do think that if Rodgers was still there, I know their form was abysmal, but I would back Rodgers over a new manager to get them out of it. I think that 7 or 8 games just isn't enough for a new manager to get a team firing again, unfortunately. And I think for Forest, it's a case now of it's probably going to be them or Leeds. I know Everton were poor yesterday against Fulham, but I do think that a Sean Dyche side will get out of it. I think they'll keep picking up points here and there and get out of it. Leeds United possibly might be the only escape for Forest. I think it's a big game for Forest today against Man United, actually. And as crazy as it seems, I think Forest have got to at least get something out of that game, because they're on a terrible run. I think 9 games without a win. They're at home against Man United today. If they went and won that match, my God, that would be a real boost for them, because they've then got Liverpool away from home, Brighton at home, but I don't think they're going to get anything out of those 2 games. They've then got Brentford and Southampton, Chelsea, Arsenal and Palace to end the season. Now, if they go and beat United, they've then still probably got to go and beat Brentford and Southampton. That puts them on, 36 points? It's looking a bit bleak for Forest, I have to say. I don't think that magical 40-point mark is going to be the one that's reached this season. I think it's going to be slightly below that. But the only other team is West Ham, who could be a surprising go. But again, I just think West Ham have got the quality to stay up. It's always that thing of they're too good to go down. And that's the thing about Leicester that's a real shock. But I just can't see them beating anybody at the moment. So I think it's going to be the 3 that are down there at the moment. I don't know. Do you think there'll be any change from who's down there?
Well, I think Southampton are definitely down. I've got to say. I mean, they've been poor all season. I think that's the, a lot of the teams around the bottom, some of them have had good spells in the league. Southampton haven't, in my opinion. They've been looking dodgy, not just this season, but for quite a few years now. It's a bit like the Sunderland effect. From years and years ago, where Sunderland kept finishing 17th, and eventually, one season they went down and they still haven't come back up, and that could be a very similar position for Southampton. I mean, back in the day, they were lauded for their youth system and bringing in new young players all of the time. We had the likes of Walcott, we had Oxlade-Chamberlain, we had Ward-Prowse, obviously. But that doesn't really seem to be happening anymore. And, I do feel sorry for them in a way, because I think it will be very tough for Southampton to come back up. But I think Southampton are gone. Leicester, I mean, as you say, too good to go down. which potentially means that they can win some of their games. I think, as you say, it's a very, very poor decision to sack Brendan Rodgers, especially because they didn't have a plan of succession. You know, they didn't have somebody in mind. It was quite clear about that because they were talking to everybody. And now they've got Dean Smith. And, Dean Smith did an all right job for one season at Aston Villa, kept them in the league, but I don't see him doing that unless Jamie Vardy can come in and score some goals between now and the end of the season. I know he's had a lot of injury problems this year, and potentially him coming back is going to be what is their saviour, but he's 36 now. It's
one step too far, I think.
Yeah, it's a long, long odds for that, I think. Notts Forest, I mean, you said they've not had a particularly good season. I think we said at the start of the season for Nottingham Forest, who got off to a woeful start as well, with 8 games to go, they'll be level on points with 17th in the league. I think most Forest fans would have surely taken that they surely didn't have any ambitions of being top half or anything. So I don't know what.
Of course not. No, I think that the disappointment was, I think they were 12th at one stage and got quite a bit of a buffer towards the relegation zone. I think the disappointment's been they got battered by West Ham. That was a big turning point for them. After such a good draw against Man City the previous week, they went and drew against Everton, drew against Wolves, but then the last 2 games for them has been the nail in the coffin, I think. They lost to Leeds. That was a crucial game to take 3 points away from your relegation rivals. They were uninspiring against Villa, lost 2-0 there. Didn't have a lot of the ball either. That's been Forest's problem. They're looking at a lot of their games, they don't seem to get more than 20-25% of the ball, and that's a big problem for them. And I just think the belief's pretty gone, I would say, at this point. They were trudging along sort of December and January time. Had some good results. They had a draw against Chelsea, beat Southampton, beat Leicester, drew against Bournemouth as well, and beat Leeds in quite a strong period for them. And then it just seems to have tailed on since then. The only thing that might save Forest is their home form, which, in fairness, if you look at the home form even recently, they lost 2-1 to Newcastle, and that was purely because of a stupid handball from Niakate that just didn't need to happen in the last couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Apart from that, they've got a really good record at home. I think they were unbeaten in 8 or something before that Newcastle match. Made a draw against Wolves, which they should have won that. I think Wolves got a late equaliser there. The big one which I'll always come back to with Forest, I remember at the start of the season they were playing the 2 teams that got promoted with them, Fulham and Bournemouth, and they were ahead against both. They lost both games. Collapsed. I think they conceded at least 2, if not 3, against one of the sides in 10 minutes. And ultimately, and I hate this what-if scenario, if they'd have won those 2 games, they'd have been on 33 points.
Yeah.
And potentially 6 points away. And those 2 games, they felt big at the start of the season for Forest. And I think that's what might come to bite them now. But the Leeds game in particular, I think if they'd have got a draw at least out of that, I could look at something for Forest. It'd be a real shame, I think, if Forest went down, because it's quite nice to see Forest back in the league, obviously from my personal perspective, but they're a big side, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can dispute that, and it's great to see them back, much like it was great, obviously they hadn't been gone for anywhere near as long, but it was nice to see Villa back as well once they went down.
And Leeds, yeah, you know.
No, not Leeds. No, not Leeds. But yeah, all right, fair enough, Leeds. But I'm not a Leeds fan at all. I'd be quite, well, especially for Forest, in the personal perspective, it'd be nice to see Leeds go down. I think it would be a big shame for the league if Everton went down. Even though I'm saying that as a Liverpool fan, I think Everton has struggled to come back. I really do. But it could be a season where we haven't had this for a long time, where all 3 promoted sides stop up, and I think Bournemouth look good to stop up. Obviously, Fulham will. If Forest stop up, it's going to be one of Everton, Leeds, or West Ham, you would say. So it's really interesting down there, and I think there's some more twists and turns to come. But ultimately, I think I just can't see past the 3 that are down there at the moment. So that's the verdict I'm going to go with. I'll leave you to give the viewers your verdict. And then, of course, we've got the title race, which I'm going to just go straight away. Man City are going to win the league, because I have been a tortured Liverpool fan for too long, who have the lead over Man City and have that belief that they're going to do it. last game of last season, Villa 2-0 up under Gerrard. Liverpool wait for that goal against Wolves, and then City go and score 3 in 10 minutes. And I just know how good City can be. And I have to say that dropping points against Liverpool was gutting for Arsenal. I think if they'd have gone and won that one and given themselves a slight buffer, I don't see Arsenal beating Man City. They might draw it, but I think Arsenal will slip up somewhere else, whereas I just don't see it from City. Yeah, I'd be a shame for Arsenal not to win it at this stage. I don't think it'd be a failure to finish second by any means, but it would be a really good chance for them to go and win the league. And you have to say, to Arsenal's credit, if it wasn't for them, City would have walked away with it. So at least it's give us a title race. And even though Arsenal are still 3 points ahead, I think it's Man City's. I mean, Arsenal have got West Ham today, which you just never know how that one's going to go. I don't know if that's at I was going to say the Berlin ground then. The London Stadium.
Upton Park, I think you mean.
It is, well, it was the name it was, before. The
I know, the Berlin ground, yeah.
West Ham could get something out of that. You never know.
Yeah.
And if they do, that would be really torturous for Arsenal. But I don't know.
Well, Arsenal need to win every game from now. You know, the only game they can afford to drop points in is the City game. But if City win every game from now, you know, it is in their hands, so to speak. It's silly because Arsenal are 3 points ahead, but City have it in their hands of if they win every game from now until the end of the season, they will be the Premier League champions. It's a strange quirk, really, and it's all caused by, as you say, the dropping points against Liverpool. I think Arsenal do have a trickier run-in than City. I think I said it a while ago. I think Arsenal will run out of steam. I think they've had a very good run of it. The only thing that I think can save them is the fact that they're only focusing on the Premier League. That gives them that extra rest between every match. They have only got 8 more games this season to play, whereas City could potentially have 13, 14, depending on if they get to the final of the Champions League and get to the final of the FA Cup. And that's, along with their league games as well. So that would be the only thing I would say that works in Arsenal's favour. But it's going to be an interesting one. I hope Arsenal do it. I think it would be lovely to see just a different team winning it. You know, it's been a long, long time since we've had anyone other than Leicester. You know, obviously Leicester won it. But, you know, since Arsenal won it in 2004, there have only been 4 teams that have won it if you discount Leicester. So it would be quite nice to see another name up there again.
Sure.
You know, I agree with you in terms of the bottom 3. I think those will be the 3 that go. I think Leeds are the only ones that I would say I'm worried about down there. Wolves as well, potentially. But for Wolves to go down, you're looking at somebody like a Forest or an Everton having to win 3 games, which, I don't know, 3 out of the last 8. Potentially, they could do it. And then Wolves could get really dragged into it. I think Palace upwards are probably safe now, if you look at the points. What worries me about Forest is they've scored the least amount of goals in the league and they've conceded the most. So, other than Bournemouth. So, I do worry for Forest in that aspect. But I'm going to go Southampton, Leicester and Forest as well for going down. But top 4 battle and European battle in general, that's probably the place where there's going to be the most drama come the end of the season. I think there's probably going to be 3 or 4 teams on the last day in the relegation fight. There could be exactly the same number of teams in the battle for the top 4. And of course you've got Newcastle, who are in pole position at the minute. They're 3rd after 30 games. Man United have got a game in hand. They're on 56. Villa and Tottenham just a little bit behind. Tottenham on 53 and Aston Villa on 50. But they've played a game or 2 more than the teams above. Obviously, you've then got Brighton in 7th. They've got a game in hand. And then you've got your boys, Liverpool, in 8th. I think if they win every game from now until the end of the year, they'll run it close. But the way Liverpool have played this season, I don't know if you think that's particularly likely or not.
Not a chance. Not a chance. I think that I have to say, I think that the top 4 as it is will stay as it is. I don't think there's going to be much competition there because Newcastle struggled yesterday against Villa. That was a shock. But Villa are playing really well at the moment. Man United will get in. Tottenham are just too inconsistent. I can't see them doing it, especially under a caretaker manager. Villa are playing really well, but if you look at Newcastle and Man United, even if Newcastle and Man United lose their games in hand, 6 points over 7 matches, and obviously a superior goal difference for Man United, albeit only slight, obviously losing 7-0 to Liverpool. And a massive goal difference for Newcastle. I can't see Villa getting there. Brighton have run out of steam a little bit, and that game against Tottenham was crucial, which they were robbed of by those couple of decisions. So I think the top 4 will stay the same. I would actually back Tottenham and Villa to finish 5th and 6th now. I think that Villa are on a really good run. Brighton might get 6th, but again, I don't know about Brighton. I was backing them a couple of weeks ago for the top 4, but I think that match against Tottenham will really dent them. But I guess if they win their 2 games in hand on Villa and Tottenham, they've got a really good chance. Liverpool are too far back, I think. I can't see them getting there. I mean, if they win the last 9 games, that's 71 points, which I think on past history would be tight to get into the top 4. But again, I just can't see them doing it. And from a Liverpool fan's perspective, I'd much rather finish 8th than 6th or 7th. I'd rather not be in Europe than be in the Europa or the Conference League. And I think for teams like Villa and Brighton, you'd almost rather them get there because it's somebody different and they will actually respect the competition. I think if Liverpool are in the Conference League, it's certainly a drag, something that they're not going to be too interested in. I mean, they could win it at a canter, but if they want to get back into the Champions League, ultimately their main route would be to get into the top 4 to do that. And I think that those 2 competitions, the Europa or the Conference League, would just be purely a distraction. So I'm going to go for the current top 4 as they are. You know what? I'm going to go for Tottenham and Brighton as 5th and 6th. I think Villa might just peter out a bit. And obviously, Brighton have got 2 games in hand on the 2 teams above them. I'll go Villa for 7th and then Liverpool for 8th. And below that, I think Brentford will finish 9th and Fulham 10th, which for both those sides is a really good season, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's lots of teams in the top half that you wouldn't have necessarily predicted to be there. Particularly after the first few matches as well with Villa, all the way down there. They've had a great run. I do have a feeling Newcastle are due a bad run of form. So I do think Newcastle might finish 5th and somebody else will sneak into the top 4. I get what you're saying about Tottenham. I'm not sure it will be them because certainly under caretaker charge they've not been convincing at all. And then basically it's saying will Villa finish top 4 or will Brighton finish top 4, which I get why you say Newcastle will probably stay up there, because you wouldn't expect them to make a 7-point swing over Newcastle over the final 8 games. But we will see it, and I'm sure we will talk about it before the season is done. Lots and lots of interesting stories in there, and it'll be interesting to see over the next sort of 8 weeks or so how that goes. And well, it's not even that, is it? It's more like 5 weeks of Premier League football until the end of the season. And yeah, good luck to all of them. Little shout out, actually, not a big shout out. Little shout out to my hometown team, South Shields, who will be in Football Manager next year. Toby, they are going to be in the Vanarama National League North. They've been promoted. They've been very unlucky actually over the last 5 seasons. They had a string of promotions, and then they were top of the league during the COVID season, which was written off. They were top of the league the next year when the season was also cancelled. So they would have been promoted, those two. I think they lost in the playoffs last season. And then, they've finally been promoted this season. But it has Kevin Phillips is their manager now. So that's an interesting one for next year, Toby. So you'll be keeping an eye on their results, no doubt.
Of course.
In the Vanarama National League North. But no, looking forward to that next season. So a little shout out to them before we move on to the next sport of interest. And that, unless you've got anything else to say about football.
No, let's carry on.
Let's carry on then. So the World Snooker Championship, Cazoo Snooker World Championship 2023 got underway on Saturday the 15th of April. I know you're going down to the Crucible on the first Monday, Toby, so are you looking forward to that? And obviously I think you're seeing Ding and Vafai. Who are the other ones on the other side?
It's Alan and Fan.
Okay.
I think. So it always sounds weird. I guess it's a geographical thing. I'm going up to Sheffield tomorrow, not down, but there you go. It all depends where you're situated, obviously. But yeah,
I'm going
decent.
sideways too.
You're going sideways, are you?
Yeah.
That still doesn't sound right, does it? Surely it's slightly south, or I don't know. But let's not turn this into a geography lesson. But yeah, it should be decent. It was one of them really going to the Crucible that we've had the Players' Championship at Wolverhampton local to me the last couple of years, so I've been there to support that local event. Went up to York in November to the Barbican, but that was a long day, 2.5 hours each way. But that was nice just to do for a day, and I just wanted to do that to say I've been, and same goes for the Crucible really. And without being harsh to those two players, it's not the most exciting match in the world, but A, it's a day off work, and B, it's a day out, so I'm not going to complain about that too much. And it'd be my first time at the Crucible, maybe the last, because as you know, I'm the most stingy person in the world and only paid for one session. But then I think when I booked the tickets, it was there were very limited availability by the time I booked. Could only get in one session. So a bit of both factors contributing there. But I love the World Championship. I really do. For the whole 17 days, there's not much more I do apart from watching the snooker. I have to say, I know we said before we went on air, I guess you could call it, that a lot of the first round matches aren't really that inspiring. I think that's the case most years, really. I think that things get more exciting as you get to the second round. Obviously, Ronnie won yesterday against Panja and Shu, and I mean, Pang wasn't in it for most of the game, was he? And then came back on the evening, and I genuinely thought we had a potential game on, because I think it was 9-4, and I thought, well, Ronnie's won it, and then switched it off for half an hour to watch the MotoGP sprint race, and it was 9-7, and I thought, blimey, he's back in it. But no, Ronnie did well there. We've seen Bingham ball run beat Dave Gilbert this morning, which means that your 16-fold accumulator is presumably sunk.
Well, sad times, isn't it? But yeah, my traditional 16-fold accumulator. I think the best I did one year was 14 out of 16. I'm not sure I'll ever get to 16 out of 16, but we keep the faith going forward, and we'll see what happens. But no, it'll be good. I mean, the big question for me, Toby, when you're there, well, tomorrow as we record this in the morning, after your session, are you gonna make your way over to the Winter Gardens and have a spy on Hazel and Steve and John, and maybe even play on the table there?
The first question possibly, the second definitely not.
Oh.
I've made a pillock of myself several times on YouTube, so I'm not going to extend that to TV. But yeah, I might head over there for an hour or so afterwards. That would be good. It's always a nice experience to go and watch snooker in person. I have to say, for anybody who hasn't done it before, that it is much more immersive. Like anything, I guess, you get the atmosphere than watching it on the TV. And funnily enough, when I went, I've been several times and never been bothered about the commentary. Again, for two factors, because I'm not willing to pay £12 for a headset, and also because it just generally doesn't bother me. And I have to say, you get very invested in the matches. But equally, when there's a half an hour safety battle, you can understand why some people do fall to sleep. But it is a good experience. I guess that the main talking point here is We've gone for, I believe, opposite sides of the draw for who's going to win. You've gone for the top seed, I think, haven't you? You've gone for Mr. O'Sullivan. And I've gone for Mr. Selby. Discuss.
Yeah, well, I mean, lots of people have asked me, do I think Ronnie will win this week or this fortnight? Now, I say no, I don't think he will. However, the way my sort of predictor game worked out, I couldn't see him losing any of the matches that he was in. So yeah, it's one of those really. I think Ronnie wasn't at his best yesterday. It was actually the first time since the 2013 semi-final that he didn't make a century in a Crucible match. That's a little stat for you there. But you know, I think it's like all things. Until he plays somebody that he will feel pressure against, I don't think we will see the best of Ronnie, and that could be his undoing. I really don't know. But yeah, I mean, I've went Ronnie through the predictions. I think if it's not Ronnie, my tips would be Sean Murphy or Selby, as you say. I mean, Selby's always very good at the Crucible. Obviously won it a couple of years ago, not playing his best. Has probably won 3 of his 4 world titles as somebody not at their best. So it's interesting. I mean, if he gets to number 5 this year, when will people start talking about him potentially reaching the 7? You know, I mean, that's it's not that far away for Mark Selby, but I mean, that would be a massive surprise for me. You know, I haven't watched snooker pretty much through all of Mark Selby's career. He's never really struck me as somebody that could potentially end up with the record number of world titles. You know, there was a long time I thought he would never win a world title, and you know,
got that one wrong.
Yeah, you know, wasn't the only one that thought that, but it's yeah, I think a lot depends on the first couple of rounds. I think you get a good idea of who's going to win by the quarterfinals, usually. So you've got to get through that first round. I think Murphy's definitely somebody you have to watch in the first round. He has to try and get through that. And Selby, you know, he's got Matthew Selt. I don't think Selt will put him under pressure, but stranger things have happened.
True. I think, as you've potentially alluded to there, I think the draw is quite open for those 2 players. That's why you probably have to say they're the 2 favourites, really. I don't think that Ronnie's going to be threatened until the quarterfinal if he faces Mark Williams. If not, I think that extends to the semi-final. I just can't see either. I mean, in the nicest ways possible, I can't see Jimmy Robertson beating Mark Williams. And after that, I can't see him beating either Brissell or Walden. So with that logic, it's only going to be Williams who would threaten Ronnie in the quarterfinal. Then you're probably looking at Sean in the semis, and that's when I've gone for Ronnie to drop out. I think that Sean's got a really good chance this year, but there's an element, I think, similar with Mark Allen, that they've been really good this year, particularly Mark Allen, in his example, that he started to fade slightly recently. I know that at the Players' Championship he lost to Joe O'Connor in the first round, and he lost at the Tour Championship, did he, in the first round? I can't quite remember now, but I'm sure he went out quite early, didn't he?
Yeah.
So there's an element of that coming into it for Mark Allen, and I think he'll beat Fan Zheng He, but Bingham could be a tricky opposition. I know that I maybe rate Bingham higher than you do, but Bingham could be a tricky opposition for him. After that, though, if he does get past Bingham, he's got a good chance of getting to the semis, I'd say, because Robertson also always struggles at the Crucible, and I can't see that changing this year. He's the main player in that side of that quartet there. And then for Selby at the bottom, again, it's quarterfinals. He's going to beat Wilson or Slessor, you would say, if he got through. And then even after that, Higgins, bit of an unknown quantity this year. If he plays to his best, he could wipe the floor with anybody. I think everybody knows that, but whether he does or not is to be questioned. And then I know you rated Kyron a lot higher than I have. I can't see Kyron getting too far either. So I think I have to say it's probably going to be, looking at the quartets we've got, it's going to be one of Ronnie, Murphy, Mark Allen or Mark Selby. But as with every year, there's always somebody who surprises us. One name we haven't mentioned is Judd Trump. And I think it's no secret that either of us are the biggest Judd Trump fans, but he's not had a great season. I think the quarterfinals could be his limit. But ultimately, I think if the one thing that would open things up massively is, as you've just said, if Murphy loses that first round match, I think if he loses that first round match, it then gets really tight in that section, because I don't think you can write Joe Perry off particularly. I think he'll beat Milkins, and if he gets that confidence to get to the quarterfinals, he could be somebody to watch potentially. Bit of an unknown quantity there, and then Nop on. Obviously, got Jack as well, and McGill. McGill, as you well know, Joe, he's a Crucible specialist. Anthony McGill.
Well, apparently
he could go far again. So I think that it could be there could be some shocks, but ultimately there's got to be one match to go wrong for one of the favourites for that domino effect throughout. But I just can't see that happening, unfortunately. But hopefully we get a really good World Championship this year. It's been great viewing the last couple of years. But I know that some people have said that we could see a new champion, but I have to say I can't see that. The only occasion where I can see that is possibly Mark Allen. I can't see anybody else troubling it. I don't know what you think there, but the chances of that I think are pretty low.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think until you've seen the first round matches, I think you've been a bit harsh on Kyron. Actually, I think Kyron was incredible in the Tour Championship. He was very unlucky to come up against the one player that was playing better than him, and that was Sean Murphy. So, I think Kyron will go far. Always tends to do well at the Crucible. I think if anyone is going to win their first Crucible, it might be him. In my opinion, I think Mark Allen, even when he was winning tournaments, I said this on another podcast I do about snooker, funnily enough. But yeah, with Mark Allen, I think a lot of his play this season has been inflated by the fact that so many players have had a poor season. I'm not certain Mark Allen would be, quote, player of the season had Neil Robertson, John Higgins, Ronnie O'Sullivan been at their best. Judd Trump, I think all four of them are better players than Mark Allen when they're playing well. So I don't actually buy the whole Mark Allen's been brilliant this season. He's actually been pretty average in my opinion. Even though he's won 3 tournaments, I think his style of play has been very, very questionable. And I think he's been found out a little bit when he's come to, say, the Players' Championship or the Tour Championship, where he is playing players that are playing well. And I think that's why he could potentially be. And also, he's not made it past the second round in 10 of his last 11 Crucible campaigns. So that in itself is something he has to overcome. And if we're going to bring that up about Neil Robertson every year, then I think that's something we need to bring up about Mark Allen. Both players that just don't seem to do well at the Crucible. So yeah, for me, Mark Allen isn't one of the favourites. I know he is for a lot of people, and that's just my personal opinion. I hope I'm wrong, because I actually quite like Mark Allen. He's grown on me a lot over the last few years, and I think I would like to see him win a World Championship in his career. I don't think it'll be this year for me. I think there's too many players like a Murphy or a Selby that will just tear him apart over 35 frames, 33 frames. I just can't see him winning the majority of them for me. But yeah, we'll see. It could be a new champion, but more likely than not, it's going to be O'Sullivan or Selby, which it has been for most of the last 11 years, since 2012. Selby's won 4, Ronnie's won 4, and there's been 3 others in there for Bingham, Williams, and Trump. So, yeah, that's the way I see it anyway. But it's going to be a good couple of weeks, of course. Brilliant to hear the usual crew on the microphones in the commentary box, and obviously the coverage, extensive coverage on the BBC is always good for snooker, in my opinion.
We've just lost 50% of the viewership because clearly Eurosport is the best.
Apparently
Let's not
so.
go back. We had
even though Toby,
ago,
right?
So.
Even though apparently Brassel was on a frame-winning break, and they cut him off mid shot to put on swimming or cycling. So they actually did exactly what people complain about the BBC doing. So there you go, Toby. Need I say any more? But that's snooker for you. I think we'll have a very quick chat about the Formula One. I don't think there's a lot to say about it, but obviously the 2023 season has begun. We're on a little bit of a hiatus at the moment because of the cancellation of the Chinese Grand Prix. So it's actually an early season, mid-season break. But yeah, obviously we had 3 races before that. We're in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Australia. I had to remember that there. Obviously, Red Bull have been very fast. I think perhaps akin to 2013. Would you say back end of 2013? That sort of where one of the drivers in particular is turning up, and it seems particularly in the race to be able to pull out a very good lead very quickly. I think that's very akin to Sebastian Vettel in the back end of 2013. I think also maybe 2020 Lewis Hamilton as well. I know Hamilton would win races by 20, 30 seconds in that year as well. So in terms of a title fight, we might not have much to go on, although maybe Mercedes are actually faster than they're making out. And actually, we kind of know in all of this that Mercedes are the best developers throughout a season. So with it being a record 23 race season, is there any hope for anyone else, or do you think it is going to be number 3 for Max Verstappen?
No, I think it is going to be number 3 for Max, and it's quite disappointing. I think that, and it always happens in Formula One, that one team ultimately outdoes the rest, and that's just inevitable. That you're going to have very rare occasions where you've got 2 teams that are so close. The real advantage for Max is that Ferrari have had a woeful start. I think Leclerc was really going to be his main title rival. He's already 63 points behind. That's, in context, that's 2 race wins and a 4th, basically, or plus 1 point.
Which, in fairness, I think Max Verstappen was fairly far behind at this point last season, wasn't he?
But can we see Ferrari taking all those points off Red Bull? I don't think we can, off Verstappen in particular, and that's going to be Ferrari's problem, in that they've got to then beat Perez as well. They've got to beat the 2 Mercedes and Fernando Alonso, the wily old fox, who's had 3 podiums so far, all 3rd places, even though they've tried their best to take them off him on more than a few occasions, obviously in Saudi and then quite literally in Australia by the Ferrari sabotaging him on that hectic restart, which was just a complete joke. But yeah, the Formula One, I have to say that at one point F1 was my main sport. I was really excited by it, and the last couple of years it's faded for me a bit. I think that because some of my favourite drivers have retired, Raikkonen's gone, obviously Jenson Button went a long time ago. The old flame, Fernando's still there, but there's nobody to get particularly excited about for me. And yeah, it's a shame, because F1's been a big part of my life. I'll still watch the races, of course, but my investment isn't quite there as it used to be, I don't think, which is a big shame. But maybe, like your relationship with football, it'll come back massively and you'll love it. But who knows? But I think in terms of the title battle for this year, I'd be very shocked if it's anything other than a 3rd title for Max Verstappen. I don't think there's any real merit in Sergio winning it. I think ultimately he did a very good job in Saudi Arabia, but his teammate started a long way back, and I think if they're both on the same pedestal and both start on the front row, that Max will win out. And I think that's inevitable just from a team perspective, that they're going to give Max the opportunities because, as you say, Mercedes might develop and start to win races. But I think as talking points go this year, it could be a quiet season, which we've had plenty of them. It's nothing new in F1. I think we had a very good season we were treated to with the Max versus Lewis battle. Before that, you can look that there's been plenty of seasons with not a lot of excitement. And I think, unfortunately, this might be one of those. And the interesting factor being Fernando Alonso, I guess, and that Aston Martin being up there with some interest. And it'd be great if he can win a race or two. That'd be brilliant, just to stop the commentator saying that his last white race win was Spain 2013. And hopefully Sky can make something different to Sky Glass and Sky Stream, because I'm sick of Crofty every race saying, well, if you're a Sky Glass, Sky Q or Sky Stream customer, you can view the highlights. But that's a totally different debate. But
watch all the onboards, all 20 onboards, Toby.
Yeah, which is something you could do on F1 TV for the last 3 years. But oh well. And something that I'm not particularly interested in. Surely, if there's something going on, the world feed should cover it, you would think. But if you're watching from somebody's onboard, it's not really as good as watching from the director view as we know it as. I don't know. Well, am I being pessimistic or not?
You know what? I don't actually mind the whole onboard camera view, but why can't they feed the commentary into that? So that if something's happening, I can go, right, I don't want to watch Hulkenberg's on board now. I'm going to watch the main feed. Because they say, you know, it can be pitch and all of that. I don't certainly see any of those features. It's certainly not user-friendly. And if it's not user-friendly for the likes of me and you, then who is it for at the end of the day? But no, it's yeah, you know, I think you're right about the championships. You know, most of them are sewn up by 3 or 4 races before the end. I think last season was a perfect example of that. But where Red Bull has maybe got it right, where other teams have got it wrong, is they are putting all of their favour behind one driver. They might not publicly say it, but everybody knows it. You know, and obviously the best teams in the past have always done that. You had Schumacher at Ferrari, who went on a very dominant streak. You could argue, other than 2009 and 10, Vettel at Red Bull, you know, had preferential treatment. And when you've got a fast team who are preferring one of their drivers, you inevitably end up with one of these dominant seasons, because Lewis and George are going to take points off each other. Sainz and Leclerc are going to take points off each other. So you sort of inevitably end up with Max Verstappen having much more of a point swing over those guys than he would do if, say, Mercedes said, right, okay, we're going to throw everything behind George Russell or Lewis Hamilton, or Ferrari say, right, we want everything behind Charles Leclerc this season. Maybe those gaps would be a little bit smaller had teams done that, and I think it's maybe too late in the season by the time they are focusing on one driver.
Yep.
And that's maybe what Red Bull are doing well. I know they're criticised for it, and you know, obviously since team orders have come back into Formula One publicly, I think we've had a lot more of that. Obviously, we had a lot of it with Lewis and Valtteri. Obviously, we've got Max and now
we've always had it though, haven't we? We had it with Sebastian and Mark. We had it famously with Fernando and Felipe Massa in 2010.
Yeah.
I think that the couple of years before that were gold dust, really, with sort of 2006 to 9, where there was some real excitement among a lot of different teams. But obviously before that we had Michael, and you can go back even further than that, and you get a very rare occasion where there's 2 drivers, either from the same team in particular, fighting so close that they have to make that decision. But Red Bull have probably done the right thing of saying early on, we'll back Max, and I think that's, you know, that's a good decision.
And I think it comes from, you know, you only really get teams giving equal status when the drivers are in fact equal. I think not many people will argue that Max Verstappen is on a different level to Checo Perez, and Hamilton was on a different level to Bottas. But when it was Hamilton Rosberg, for instance, much more equal, or Hamilton Button, or Vettel Webber, or even Vettel Raikkonen in a way at Ferrari, much more equal standing in the team, and then they get equal treatment generally, until one of them is much further on in the championship battle. So I guess maybe that's where we're at. Sainz and Leclerc and Hamilton and Russell are much more evenly matched than Perez and Verstappen, and it's sort of done by design, really, I guess. And I think Red Bull are quite happy with that. I think we discussed it on one of these podcasts multiple years ago, but the only problem where that would arise, and did in 2021 ultimately, is where Perez is so significantly far behind Verstappen that they're not in the battle for the constructors title, and that's where maybe Red Bull will look down the line. They don't need to worry about it this season because they're so fast, but if we get to a point where we had it in the early 2010s, where we've got 3 teams capable of winning races regularly, then maybe they will have to think about, right, okay, we need somebody stronger to sit next to Max to get those points in. And maybe that's where Ricciardo comes back into the sport. I don't know. We will see over the next few years. But obviously, you think Verstappen's going to win it. I assume you think Red Bull are going to win the constructors as well. I can't really look past Max. I think particularly since he's won that first one, he's got a maturity about him now, a bit like Vettel had in those early years of a single mindset of winning races. I think even in the glory years of Lewis Hamilton, he still had off days. I'm not sure we're going to see off days from Verstappen personally, and we'll see how many he can go on. I mean, I don't think he's going to win 7 in a row. I think that would be a very, very hard, tough task to come on, and maybe that puts Hamilton's achievements in perspective, that he very nearly did win 7 in a row, but I think he'll win at least 3 or 4, and then inevitably there'll be some team that come through and usurp Red Bull, whether that be Mercedes, whether that be Aston Martin, whether that be McLaren. It might be Ferrari. Who knows? It might be Ferrari. But, I think we're in that period of there's going to be a few, 2 or 3 years now until we get a real title fight again, I think. And lots of people already looking towards 2026. I know, what is it, the P1 podcast with Matt and Tommy? They've already done 2026 driver predictions. So, people are already writing off the next few years. And, maybe it's not quite that bad, but especially with the volume of races that we've got in a season, we do have the potential of these things happening where Max Verstappen wins a championship by 150 points. And, that's not great for the sport, but we'll see what happens. But I'm sure we'll still be watching, and we'll be discussing that throughout the season. And I think we've pretty much come to the end of our podcast now. I think it's been a really good chat. We've obviously talked about football, and in particular the Premier League, with a little shout out for the Vanarama National League North at the end of that segment. We've obviously talked about the 2023 World Championship Snooker, sponsored by Cazoo, and the F1 World Championship 2023, which is sponsored by Red Bull, really. I think, but we'll see over the next few weeks. We'll be talking about different topics. I'm sure about that. In the next podcast, I'm sure we'll talk more about snooker. But as snooker goes on a very long break between the May the 1st and September pretty much until the decent tournaments are back. We'll talk about other things when the golf majors are on. We'll be talking about them. I know I really enjoyed watching the Masters. Actually, that's probably the most I've ever watched golf. So that'll be something that we talk about in the future. But do let us know in the comments if you are watching on YouTube any of your thoughts about today's topics. Obviously, the World Championship. Who do you think is going to win that? And I'm going to leave it ambiguous. It could be I'm talking about snooker or Formula One. Do let us know in the comments. Who are the 3 teams that you think will get relegated from the Premier League, and what will be the top 4? And ultimately, who is going to win the title? Obviously, we've got the opinion that it's going to be Manchester City. I hope it's going to be Arsenal. Toby really doesn't want it to be Arsenal. So it'll be interesting to hear your views down in the comments section below. Any final thoughts before we go, Toby?
Well, next year we'll be no doubt previewing the 2024 Dual Bits World Championship, but that's probably something we can talk about in another episode.
Well, yes, absolutely. But no, it's been a pleasure to be back. We will try and make this more regular. I think now we've got a more open topic base. I think it definitely will be more regular. And I think we'll be talking about Kiefer Sutherland at some point, because we're both going to see him in July in Manchester. So we might even have the Joe and Toby Talk summer message.
Oh God!
But no, thank you very much for the support. Do subscribe to the Joe and Toby Talk channel if you want to see more. Leave a like, all of that good stuff. Get involved down in the comment section, and we will see you on the next podcast. Goodbye.